These questions will all be solved for theta, and we're going to solve them between 0 and 2 pi. So that would be one time around your unit circle. And the first ones would be on a calculator part of your exam, or test, or quiz, or whatever. So A, we're going to solve 3 sine theta equals -2. First of all, since the domain that was given right here is in radians, that means that we're going to be solving all of our questions in radians, so we need to make sure that our mode is in radians. Okay? Getting sine by itself gives us -2/3. -2/3 isn't a y-coordinate on our pi plate, so this is why this is a calculator question and not one you can do without your calculator. The fact that it's negative, from our cast rule, we already know that this is going to be either in quadrant 3 or quadrant 4. If we were to draw this actual angle out, we would know that we would have a hypotenuse of 3, an opposite side of 2, and this triangle that's made, this is our reference angle. Now, whenever I label my triangles, I always use positive values because that's a triangle and those are its actual lengths on that triangle. Some people like to add a negative in front of the 2 because it's going down, but I like to use the positive values because when you find your reference angle is always positive. So if I take this triangle, I can now write out that sine of my reference angle would be 2/3, and the negative's not there. And this is especially important when you're dealing with radians because a reference angle is always between 0 and 90 degrees, or between 0 and pi/2 when you're talking in radians. However, it's much easier to recognize that you've got the right reference angle in degrees than it is in radians, just because you're not as used to working with it. So now when you go to your calculator and you go sine inverse of 2/3, you get 0.730. That's just rounded. So we should do the squiggle brackets because I've rounded it here. However, when I'm going to do all my calculations, I'm going to use all the decimal places until I get my final answer. So there it's rounded, 0.730. Then if I want to find out what theta actually is, I would have to go to quadrant 3, which will be pi plus my reference angle. The answer in quadrant 3 would be 3.87 approximately. And if I want to find the one in quadrant 4, I'll go 2 pi minus my reference angle. And I'll get 5.55. So there's our first one, solving for theta with a calculator. I'm going to give you a second one. I'm going to get you to try it. Okay? So here's B, 8 tan theta plus 3. Getting tan by itself, were you able to get -3/8? Thinking of the cast rule, then this is going to be in quadrants 2 and 4 where tan is negative. If I drew one of them, the opposite side would be 3, the adjacent would be 8, and here's our reference angle. So when we find what our reference angle is, We go tan inverse of 3/8. And we get 0.359. Then in quadrant 2, squiggle brackets, rounded would be 2.78. And quadrant 4, 5.92. How'd you do? Good? You didn't get those ones? Okay, now we'll get to some non-calculator ones. Call this C. 4 cos theta minus 16 equals 0. So most of the non-calculator ones, what that will mean is you will get a value that's on your pie plate. However, in this case, when I move this 16 over and divide by 4, I get cos theta equals 4, and that's not on my pie plate. So generally you would think, oh, I need my calculator for this. Now if you had your calculator for this one and tried to get the reference angle, you'd run into a problem and your calculator would say error. If you go and say, if we go through the same steps that you did before, and you said to yourself, okay, cos is positive, according to the cast rule, that's in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4, and if I just try to draw a picture of it in quadrant 1, I need, to make this a fraction, I need my adjacent side to be 4 and my hypotenuse to be 1, and then you run into some issues. Because if my hypotenuse is 1 and my adjacent side is 4, that triangle can't exist, because the hypotenuse is always the longest side. So all you would have to do in this one is make some sort of indication that it's not possible. There's no solution to this one. And partially when you try to draw that triangle, you realize that. Sometimes when you go straight to your calculator, you start to go, is there something wrong with my calculator? Because it's giving me an error. But your calculator is telling you the right thing because there is no solution for this. Yeah. And this is our last one without a calculator. And all of these questions, they're part of Chapter 7, but they're also stuff that we've done in Chapter 6, so they're going to be on your test next week, Wednesday. Yeah.
The last one, we can also just think about the function, that the function is at minus 16.
Mm-hmm.
It's never to 4, so therefore it can never reach a few.
Yeah, you could look at it graphically as well. So for this one, once you get tan by itself, you get negative root 3. Is root 3 on your pie plate for tan? Yes. What family? Pi over 3. Pi over 3. Remember the 3? And the pi over 6 one would be root 3 over 3. So it's pi over 3 family. It's negative, so it's going to be in quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. So there's our family member in quadrant 2. And there's our family member in quadrant 4.